I'm just all about break it down, don't build it up. Building it up is where we get stuck, paralyzed, disappointed. But when we break it down to the smallest step, sure, why not?
Hello and welcome back, or welcome to The Messy Middle, a podcast designed for people tired of chasing external methods to resolve our internal messiness. I'm your host, Andrew Horsfield. The purpose of this podcast is to have conversations with leaders and experts in their field who share personal and practical strategies that you can implement to advance your career, company, and life. You can find out more or listen to previous episodes at andrewhorsfield.com/podcast. Are you waking up and walking through life just wishing it was a little bit better? Do you have a deep desire that's lying dormant that you wish you could reignite? Maybe you doubt the path you're on or feel like things are fine, but you'd prefer to be starting your day feeling fired up and full of energy. If any of these are sounding familiar to you, you're going to enjoy this conversation with Bonnie Wan, a brand strategist who, at a moment of deep despair in her own life, used her skills and expertise in creating client briefs to write herself a life brief, a personal blueprint that saved her marriage and catapulted her career that she details in her book, The Life Brief, a playbook for no regrets living. This is one of the best books I've ever read about why we need to live with intention and purpose, and more importantly, the practical steps we can take to better align our actions and aspirations. This conversation with Bonnie is a deep exploration about why we need to slow down and listen to ourselves, how we can unearth the things that matter and motivate our life, the role courage and curiosity play in living more courageously, and the benefits of choosing a life that's compelling rather than conforming. This is one of the best conversations I've had on the podcast. If you're eager to create a life that's wholly your own, you're going to enjoy this conversation with brand strategist and author Bonnie Wan. Bonnie, welcome to The Messy Middle. It is so good to be talking with you. This book you've written, The Life Brief, a playbook for no regrets living. From my opinion, humbly, it's, I reckon, the best book I've ever read around how we can live with intention and purpose. The practical, humanistic nature of the way you've written the book and described the process that's accessible for people was outstanding to read. So I was so excited to be having the opportunity to sit down with you today. So a long introduction, but welcome to The Messy Middle. It's great to be talking with you.
Thank you for having me. It's already enjoyable, just from our beginning conversation and threads. And what a great name for the podcast.
Thank you. What resonates about the name for you?
Well, we're always in change. We're evolving creatures. It's part of the human experience, and it is messy. And because you've read the book, that the whole part one, which is the most rich and meaningful and potent part of the book, is all about embracing the mess and leaning into it.
Yes, we're definitely going to get to that part, because I think that's one of the things that makes this book so valuable, of the questions that you ask threading through this to make this a really personal journey for people. We've got so much to cover because of the insight that you provide people. So I want to jump straight in, if you don't mind, and maybe just share a little bit of what your day job is, because we're going to talk a lot about the book, but maybe about your day job and then the catalyst for writing your first ever life brief.
Yeah. So my day job is I'm a brand strategist, and I've been doing it for the last 30 years. It's been a gift. It's been a joy. But my job essentially is to help companies get to the essence of who they are and where they want to go. And I know that sounds like two things, but I'm actually helping them express their essence, both of those things, in one strategy, a singular strategy. And it's expressed in a thing called the creative brief, which is a single page, single-minded crystallization of who they are and where they want to go, written as a strategy.
And can you do one without the other? Can you get to where you want to without knowing who you are?
Yeah, of course, we can express, where we want to go. I think as human beings, we're always thinking about it. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to go? But unless you really get underneath what matters to you, meaning what are your values? What do you believe? What do you care about? Then it's always going to be somewhat superficial, or more dangerously, as you pointed out, it's going to be externally driven. We're going to be open and vulnerable to other people's opinions and advice. And that's just one data point, right? For what is possible. And as children, we're raised around those data points. We're told how to be versus asked, how do you feel? What are you experiencing? How does that sit with you?
It's a great gift for people listening who can do that with colleagues, to explain or expand on another worldview that may not be your own, or maybe one that you don't necessarily agree with, but to understand it and at least just sit in it without it having to be acquiescing to it, I think is a skill that many of us could do a lot more effectively.
That is probably the most radical shift since doing this practice and writing the book. Is in all of my relationships, I'm a much more generous and active listener versus talker, including the relationship with myself.
Oh, wow. Should I do that now? Yeah, let's do that now. Tell me about that with the relationship with yourself.
Well, the entire book is an invitation for people to be in relationship with themselves. Their essence, their truth, whatever naked, honest answer they have in any given moment, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it goes against what they've been taught or told, even if it goes against the people they love, the people who matter, the people they have spent time grown up listening to. And it's not to say that our job is to disrupt those relationships, but it's to hold ourselves to be open and attuned to our own answers, while also holding space for others and finding those bridges between that. I come from a work life, from being a parent of 4 kids, a busy, busy life, right? I can go days, weeks, years without listening or tuning into myself.
Yes.
And I found that was happening for a long time. And you asked about what was the origin of the book? How did this day job become this new vocation of mine? How did I go from brand strategy to life strategy? And it was a moment of despair in my marriage that cracked it all open. This was back in 2010, and we had 3 kids under the age of 5. I was the sole breadwinner. I was commuting every day, 2.5 to 3 hours in the car, away from my babies. My husband was trying to launch his own business, and a lot of my client work was flying across the country, the United States. And I was saying yes to all kinds of things that were draining my energy, taking up my attention. And because I was exhausted, it's exhausting, no matter how you look at it, having young children. But then having the job and the pressure of bringing the bread home, it all got too much. And I thought my marriage was broken. That was the story in my head. But when I allowed myself to drop down into my strategist brain and way of looking at things, meaning, listen, write it down. Write down what do I want? There's a central question. I open the book with it. It's the first page of the book. It's what do you want? And not the kind of what do you feel like? What are you in the mood for? What do you think you want? What do your parents want for you? But in your heart of hearts, what do you really, really want?
What made you choose that vulnerability, and what did you learn about yourself through writing the book and choosing to share a lot of these great examples in your own experience?
Well, I knew I couldn't write a book and ask these questions and put an invitation out to readers without demonstrating that I understand that messy middle. I'm going to use the name of your podcast because it captures it so well. I needed to demonstrate that I too have been in those spaces and that what comes up is messy. It's not neat. It's not clean. We have a lot of emotions. I don't know about Australian culture. I have some ideas, but in American culture, and especially in American business culture or in a masculine culture, I will also say that we suppress emotions. We don't want to go there, for whatever reason. It's uncomfortable. It's terrifying. It probably is a source of messiness, right? Because as humans, and I learned this as a strategist studying human behavior, the reason marketing and everything we do in advertising exists is because people are, at the end of the day, emotional creatures and they behave irrationally. And so to deny that, to pretend that we're always rational, that we always make the best decision, the most logical, rational decisions is an illusion. We are emotional creatures. And when we allow those emotions to come through, then we can work with what's really underneath and what's driving our decisions and our choices. And the choice to be vulnerable and to be open was the choice to give people permission through my own experience. I needed people to believe that I've been there in order for me to be able to ask them to do it themselves.
For people listening, what are the indicators that they might have that they're living this well-intentioned life, and the converse to that? What are some of the indicators that they might be stuck or plateaued so that we can know which place we're in and when we might need to review or recalibrate?
Well, confusion is the obvious one, right? Confusion, not knowing where to go, but there's much more subtle signals that exist. There's just a ongoing hum of dissatisfaction or restlessness, or maybe a deeper emptiness in terms of not feeling fulfilled or not feeling a sense of meaning. And society likes to train ourselves to get really good at suppressing those, batting those emotions away, right? Just fill our time with something else. There's so many distractions to be had. But at the end of the day, what I found with doing this work for the last 14 years is that what people crave underneath it all is connection, is being seen for who they are, understood, a sense of belonging that comes from that place of really being seen and embraced and accepted, and a sense of who they are as they are is worthy. I have found that from working with people in the C-suite, startup founders, venture capitalists, as well as people on Main Street. They all share the same stories at the end of the day that they're trying to work through. One, that they aren't even aware are informing their decisions, the way they think, and their unhappiness. And they share the same stories. It doesn't matter what your circumstance or situation. I meet people all the time who are living a life of obligation, and all they crave is a sense of personal agency or freedom. This is my life. This is my choice. Or other people who feel out of alignment with the people they care about most, but they're so afraid to have the conversation. Yet, when they are able to break through and have the conversations and align like my husband and I did on our first brief, take our time, suddenly not only are we fighting each other, fighting to be heard, fighting to be understood, we are propelled into an excitement and giddy with a sense of adventure because we are aligned. And that misalignment shows up in relationships through arguing or the cold shoulder. It shows up inside us through restlessness or an emptiness. And if we can just sit in our mess or unlock the mess with curiosity, and that's what the first part of the book is giving you lots of ways into your own curiosity, then we can find the patterns, see the insights that take us to a place of clarity.
I love the fact that in that Get Messy, you actually encourage us to slow down, to just turn off some of that distraction, to turn off that sort of rational ordered, right? Who's done the lunches? Who's picking up the kids? When is that project due? And just turn off that part and listen more to our emotion and intuition, and giving ourselves permission to do that. I'm thinking more of the women who might be listening, because as a mum, it's sort of, okay, look after everyone else before you have that time for yourself. And so
Yes.
I think that can be true of leaders as well. It's not just exclusively for women, and particularly working women, but so we have this need to, where we don't look after ourselves, and it's a classic fit your oxygen mask first, isn't it? In terms of, you can't do good for other people if you're not first doing the right thing for yourself.
It's so true. And that is one of the cultural stories for women, that to be a good girl or a good mom or a good friend or a good daughter is to be devoted and in service to others. And whether it's spoken or unspoken, in so many ways, we are fed that story. And one of the invitations of this book is to look at the stories that you're living by and say, whose story is that? Is it really yours? And if you had an opportunity to write a different story, what might that be? Because when we change our stories, we change our lives.
At different times in this Getting Messy section of the book, you ask people to explore what they might be protecting when they deny what they really want. And I think it's sort of part of what you're talking about now. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that, and what you're hoping people achieve by just interrogating that a little bit in their own life?
Yes, I've met so many people, and I do it for myself, is we want to protect ourselves from hard feelings, hard experiences, disappointment. I think a lot of people face the question, what do you really want? As if it's a dangerous question, because what if I allow myself to admit what I really, really want and it doesn't happen? I can't get it. That would be, wow, so crushing. And I find that, or do I deserve to even say what I want? I met a woman at an early retreat that I led, and the first day she said, oh no, my parents told me never to ask that question. Mm-hmm. That is, asking that question will always lead to disappointment. Or what if I've never allowed myself to ask that question? What if I don't have an answer? What does that say about me? So there's all kinds of stories, right? And as I look at the world today and where we are, it's unpredictable. It's complex. It's full of surprises or ambiguity. And I find there's never been a more critical time to get in tune with, what do we want? Because we all want something different. And what is a life lived that where we don't ever ask? Because if we don't ever ask, we will never receive.
Yeah.
We will never create.
Yeah. And we often want to know exactly the steps, don't we? So even if we have this idea, we can't quite see the way forward, we tend to give up at the start, as opposed to just take that first step and see. And from my experience, that clarity is the antidote to certainty. If it's clear, you sort of take that first step and it opens up a little bit more, and you just keep heading towards the light.
Yes, I think clarity is the antidote to anxiety, fear, all those things, right? But it starts with curiosity, and curiosity isn't just sitting in a room and thinking it out. I think you pointed out such an important part. Taking steps, taking action are acts of curiosity, because when we move through life, when we move down and forward, we experience things that we get that then prompt or bring up new insights about ourselves. They offer reflections and gifts of ahas or lightning rod ideas that then we get to use as ingredients. And so getting messy isn't just thinking it out. As you said, it's not about the mind, it's about the heart. And action often stimulates new ideas.
Yes.
It speaks to our heart.
Yes.
It allows our heart to speak to us.
And I think one of those metaphors that's often used is like the conductor in leadership, conducting the orchestra in so many different parts. But I often feel personally challenged by that metaphor, because the bit that's missing in that is the conductor listening to what's coming back and then adjusting. So it's not this one person at the front just knowing everything and just finely tuning. It's hearing and listening and engaging with the person or group that they're in service of. And I feel that's a little bit of what you're asking of this messy stage of the brief, is write some things down and interact with it, not just sort of have this plan on a page that automatically just happens for you because you wish it to be true, or have a vision board, or ask the universe and it comes back easily for you.
Yes, be in deep engagement with your life.
In the second part, you start to then say, we've got these ideas and we've quietened down and we've started to do some writing that you're encouraging in the book. And then it's about seeing the threads and the ingredients that are coming out. Can you just explain and talk through that process a little bit more?
Yes. So backing up, there's 3 parts to the book. It's dead simple. You need to get messy in order to get clear. And once you get clear, action just flows. That getting active is the 3rd part. And that's just a wonderful, wild territory where anything can happen. And part 2 is collecting all the ingredients you've generated in part 1. Getting messy is coming at whatever part of your life you are meeting and wanting more clarity around, and coming at it with lots of different ways to generate your answers, your thoughts, your values, your ideas. And once we have generated that mountain of mess, part 2 helps you make meaning of it, sort and separate it, allows you to look at what really matters, what's sacred and non-negotiable, versus what's drama or distractions or a mood in the moment. And when you can sort and separate those out and then zero in on the juicy stuff, meaning the sacred stuff, the most meaningful, the stuff that matters the most, that's where your brief is born. And your brief, again, is that clear expression of the essence of what you want, your truth, right, in any part of your life, expressed in a way that moves you into action.
And does the brief, have you found the brief works like that, where they almost build on each other in terms of making life deeper and richer? Because you've done the work and clarity around one area, you find it easy to go back to say, hang on, we've done this before and we sort of know what this territory looks like?
You can return to it. So it's a dance with life, right? At the end of the day, the bottom line is this is a practice of getting into a relationship with yourself, getting very used to the feeling, the sensation, the sound of when your voice speaks to you. Even if you never write a full-on brief, if you've done all the exercises, if you've allowed them, even if you didn't do the writing, you allowed the questions to sink in and stir. And you started to connect to your intuition, as you called it. When does your body speak? When are you talking versus all the other voices in your head? And when you have clarity of that practice, it becomes easier. That's why I call it a practice. It becomes easier the more you do it.
I love that you're encouraging people once they get a sense of this life brief and what might matter to them and those threads that you're connecting in terms of the things that are meaningful. You then sort of encourage people to 3x this, to really push the boundaries of it. Tell us about that.
Well, we tend to hold back. The first thing you identified is it's human nature to be nervous or want to protect ourselves from disappointment. The other thing is we want to play it safe. And that's part of the protection, right? We don't want to declare something too big, too grand, even though in our heart of hearts, that's what we want. But we want to play it safe so that, again, we're protecting ourselves from not being too disappointed if it doesn't come about. And I call this creative living and courageous living. Creative because we're exploring more possibilities than the ones that are right in front of us. Courageous living because it's courageous to allow yourself to honestly and boldly declare what you want without any guarantee that you're going to get it. That's real courage. And I'm not asking people to declare it on social media. I'm asking and inviting you to declare it for yourself. Because when we allow ourselves to do that courageous act, which is to ask, what do we really want? And to answer without inhibition, without restraint, without playing it safe, but to give our full answer, then even if we don't get it, we know at the end of our lives, we will not hold that number one universal regret that we didn't try, that we didn't declare it. It's not about getting it. It's about having the courage to admit you want it.
I think too, Seth Godin talks about the question where people say, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I think what you're alluding to there is the question is, what would you do even though you knew you could fail? As a different way of stepping into that commitment of there's no guarantees, but this is what I'm turning up for and this is what I'm committing to. And we'll work through.
Yeah. Do you dare? Do you dare declare what you want, even without the guarantee of having it? And the illustration in the book is the second time the life brief saved my marriage. It was when my husband, we were again had gone through a big change in our family and we were pulled apart and we were living separate lives. And he asked me during a just innocuous everyday fight, "Are you still madly in love with me?" And of course, the answer that my brain wanted to answer, to be truthful, was no, not now, not recently, not for a long time. But I danced around that question. And then later when I sat with it and had the opportunity to write a new brief, my bold 3X was to push it from the safe zone of let's get along again. I want to stop fighting. I want to be back in that state of co-creation together. I want us to get along. But actually what I really wanted, if I were to be nakedly honest, naked is a funny use of the word in this context, but I did want that mad love. Gosh, I couldn't imagine the rest of my life not feeling the fire of desire of mad love. So I wrote it, but I did not believe it was possible after 17 years of marriage at that time. 4 moves, 4 kids, a dog in the mix. It was crazy. I just didn't believe that all that calcified tension between us was ever going to break down for us to get to mad love. But because I wanted it, I wrote it anyways. And I'll let everyone guess what the surprise was.
What resonated for me in that was just when people get to that place, if not just doing this now when they're listening to the podcast about tapping into what do they really want? And I know we talked about that question at the start of the book, but I think the word really is the critical word in that question you're asking.
It is. And I ask it sometimes with two reallys. And then I layer on in your heart of hearts. And then I layer on that you haven't admitted to yourself yet. You know, every layer we add on, it drives the question deeper. And I come from a strategy background where, unlike therapists or coaches, I don't have months or years to work with someone on a project. You know, I have to drop in really fast. I have to penetrate fast and go far, you know, quickly. And so that's why these questions are so important, so critical. I call them penetrating questions or driving questions, because not all questions are created equal. Some baffle you, some can really stump you, and others drive you down, drop you into an uncomfortable place. And even if you don't have an answer, even if your mind goes blank or you resist, it will sink in and stir, and it'll keep stirring because our minds like to be good students. We want to answer questions. We would like to stand up to a good challenge.
I felt one of the gifts that you gave in the book is those questions really get people to uncomfortable places, but you do it in a very positive way. And I think that's probably that brand strategist in you around what's really true here and what's the bullshit part and no, that's just the hallmark statement you've given me and that you've told over and over again to lots of people at a party rather than the truth. But it's never confronting in a slap across your face way. It's encouraging and ambitious. And so it's a lovely gift through those questions alone that you've given people. Tell us, because people may be thinking, well, that's great, but I just don't see how I can do this. So they're in that messy part of life and think that this is for someone else, or they might be thinking, oh, I wish I could do that. It sounds so good the way Bonnie's explaining it. Because you talk about how do you activate the brief? How do you start to put this into the world and live with this intention of what matters to you? And maybe it's appropriate for you to mention the Mad Love example because you referenced it before with Chip, but about that little step and how that can scale to something significant.
Tiny steps. That's it. In the slivers of time that you want to give it. That's really all it takes. That's why this invitation is so bite-sized. What is the tiniest thing you can do today in under 10 minutes? If you don't have 10 minutes, under 5 minutes. You don't have 5 minutes, under 3 minutes. I really try to invite people to break it down to the place where it's inexcusable. And there's a story of someone in the book who is a novelist, and she was stuck writing her novel. But the action she committed to every day, the tiniest, irresistible, irrefutable action was just to open the document to her book. That's it. There was no pressure to write anything. Just open the document. That's how dead dumb easy it was. And she did that every day. Some days she wrote one line. Other days she wrote 1,000 words. By the end of 30 days, she had written more in that 30-day period than she had ever experienced as a writer. And so if you're sitting there saying, no, I don't know. This is not, I don't know. I don't believe this, or your inner cynic comes out, then, maybe your first step is just look up the book. Read a quote of what somebody else got out of it. Although you're doing a really fine job, Andrew, just explaining it. Maybe your simple act is to buy the book and open and read one page and see what you think. I'm just all about break it down, don't build it up. Building it up is where we get stuck, paralyzed, disappointed. But when we break it down to the smallest step, sure, why not?
And recalibrating your marriage with Chip started just with a simple kiss, right?
a thank you and a kiss. And I don't mean a passion kiss. I meant a peck kiss in appreciation of him handing me a cup of coffee that happened every single morning on my way to work. But I wrote the Mad Love brief, and because it was lodged in me that, yes, I want mad love, I came blowing into the kitchen, as I always do, phone in hand, bag, ready to go out the door. And he handed me this beautifully crafted cup of coffee that I took for granted. And I stopped in my tracks, and I was already past him, but I turned and I looked him in the face, and I leaned in for a kiss and said, thank you. And the shock on his face and the shock on my child's face, who happened to be in the kitchen, it was just all a surprise. And I didn't really think. I kept going. I got in the car and I thought, whoa, that was a good feeling.
Mm.
And so I did that every day that week. And come the weekend, he started showing up and responding differently. And he started leaning in his own ways. And that changed the course of the direction that we were headed in. And instead of our attention being focused on criticizing each other or picking each other apart, it wasn't perfect, but we started thinking about all the little ways we could show our appreciation. And 4 weeks later, I woke up, we kind of reset our marriage vows. We took some time away from the kids. My mom came to watch the kids, and I woke up on the third morning of spending just some alone time together. And I thought, what is this feeling? Could it be? And when we talked about it, my husband said, well, here's the lesson in this. It is always available to us, should we want to choose it. And that is the real want I am talking about. When we dare to declare what we want, we automatically start to show up differently in our lives, in our situations, in our relationships.
And I mean, there's three things going through my head, but the first one is I love with that example that you've shared that in this life brief, this is a commitment, not a deal. So it's not like, well, I give the kiss because I want you to do this in return. And you mentioned that that was a week of you committing to that before there was maybe a welcoming response and Chip started to change. And I think that's important for people to realise that this is not about us doing something to get something back or feel something. It's our commitment to the thing that we're wanting to build or pursue as something that's worth reminding from what you've shared.
Oh, you're so good at this. You are really pinpointing the nuances, and thank you for highlighting those things. Yes, it is treating our relationships not as transactions, but knowing that change really starts with us and our deepest commitment to that change.
And the other thing is you don't solve a marital problem by going from 0 to 60. It's like, as you said, it was just, let me just do this one small thing. And then something else changes, which is what we said before about just that little step and see where that gets you. And then things start to grow and all of a sudden something can significantly change. And, I think you encouraging those tiny, irresistible steps it was really valuable for people to hear.
It's also important to point out it wasn't planned. It was spontaneous. But because mad love was tattooed in my heart, it was an opportunity. And so I took it. It wasn't this planned, I'm going to show up and do this and do that. And I think that spontaneity made it even more joyful and rich.
Yeah, which is, I think, the final transition of the book that you talk about, this life dance and the difference between where we start from, what do we want, to then start transitioning into how we want. Can you explain that and what you intend or mean by that difference?
Yeah, the beginning of the book starts with that driving question, as you said, what do you want? And that is a very easy and familiar way for us to converse with each other. We're used to being asked what we want. As we get deeper into the book, the question shifts into how do you want? Meaning, how do you want to show up? How do you want to shift? How do you want to serve this part of your life? And when we go there, change can be immediate. What you want might call up some kind of long distant goals, some big things. Like the what is, I want that level of income, or I want this type of relationship. But when we answer how we want to show up, that can happen immediately. And when we get clear about that, we step into not only agency, personal agency, but also accountability. And we commit to the fact that it is up to us to change and shift those relationships.
Before we wrap up, there's two questions I wanted to ask. One was, you wrote this first life brief for yourself around navigating a difficult part of your life, and now you're helping lots of other people around the world to do this for themselves as well. What have you learned about yourself through this process of taking it out to the world, from a intimate experience to now being something that you're sharing with lots and lots of people?
Well, I've learned so many things. It might be hard to just identify one or two, but I will. The thing that's most resonant and top of mind for me right now is I'm going to take Glennon Doyle's phrase: we can do hard things. When we get clear about what we really, really want, we can do hard things. And they're never harder than we make them out to be. I have learned that. And the rewards are unimaginable. The gifts are stupendous. And sometimes they're only internal. But you know what? That's where joy happens. It's not external. So, in fact, the best gifts are internal. The second thing I've learned in teaching it and working with others on theirs is that what people think they want to brief, the part of their life that they usually enter an engagement with me, they say, okay, I'm going to brief this part of my life. It always changes. Not always. It always deepens. And oftentimes it changes, because what we think we want to brief actually is hiding or masking a deeper thing underneath. And once we uncover that, then the briefs get really rich and the outcomes unexpectedly full.
What a great place to leave the conversation. Thank you, Bonnie, so much. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, that's okay. I really valued the conversation and your time and connecting. So before we do wrap up, where can people find out a little bit more about you and buy the book, which we'll obviously put links in the show notes and things too. But
well, you can reach out to me through my website, thelifebrief.com. You can follow me on social at Bonnie Wan Official or Bonnie Wan on LinkedIn. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to connect. I love connecting with readers, because now that the book is out, I am learning from readers and their own lives and their own briefs. I'm being inspired and fueled up by it. So I do encourage time and just saying hi.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie, for the insights for us to start living life by design, not by default. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks for coming on The Messy Middle.
Thank you for having me.
Two quick things before we wrap up. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to access the full list of show notes or explore some other episodes, simply visit andrewhorsfield.com. And please consider forwarding this episode to someone that you think would benefit. It will not only be appreciated by the person you choose, but help spread the word and amplify the impact I'm trying to make for the podcast. Thanks for listening.